Hello everyone, this is Dedicated Dipper here. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to showcase my level 100 Tornado Werewolf Druid build for you guys. So today we're going to go through the skill tree, Paragon board, the boons, everything, including gear. If you want to see any gameplay though, that will not be found in this video. If you want to see some gameplay of the build in action, I recommend checking out my most recent live stream. It was about 2.5 hours long and a lot of good content on there. Nightmare and Dungeons. You also have World Boss thrown in there as well. So I highly recommend checking that out. And let's get into it. So for the gear here, Tempest Roar. You need this helmet for this build to work. You know, it's gonna Storm Shields have up to 23% chance to grant 4 Spirit, so you have an opportunity to gain Spirit back. That's important because this whole build revolves around tornadoes, which is a core skill, and it does cost Spirit to use. And also, probably the biggest part of it though is that your Storm skills are Werewolf skills, and being able to get that synergy working is very important. Next, the legendary aspect. In my opinion, it's the best defensive aspect in the game. So just for doing damage, you're going to be able to stack up armor. Next we have the Earther Might key passive, also applies to storm skills. You have to have this for the build as well, otherwise you wouldn't be able to use this passive down here at all. So make sure you have that. So damaging enemies with earth skills or storm skills, because we have the legendary aspect, you have a 5% chance to restore your spirit and get crit strikes for 5 seconds. Next here we have some damage reduction while we're in werewolf form. This legendary aspect on these boots are really good, especially for nightmare dungeons and getting out of sticky situations if you're backed into a corner, things like that. So while unstoppable, which you become unstoppable when we activate Grizzly Rage, which I will get to later on in the video, but you gain 25% increased movement speed, and you can move freely through enemies. Excuse me. It's very good. Moving over to the rings. In order for this build to work, you need this legendary aspect. I do recommend putting it on your amulet, as you will get a 50% increase to its attributes. But Grizzly Rage now shapeshifts you into a dire wolf, so that will transfer Grizzly Rage. Instead of being a werebear skill, it is now a werewolf skill. Next, we have tornadoes will seek up to 3 targets. I do highly recommend this. The build could potentially work without it, but there's really nothing else that you could put on here to really make that argument, I would think, because it's better to have tornadoes actually seeking targets as opposed to just them roaming around aimlessly. And lastly, we have the duration of Grizzly Rage is increased. And in addition, critical strikes with Grizzly Rage is active. While it's active, increases your critical strike damage. So these are what I recommend. In terms of talents, attributes on each gear, on your gloves, you definitely want to get plus 4 ranks of tornado. And attack speed is also very good. Being able to, the faster your attack speed, the more tornadoes that you can spam. Because again, this build revolves around tornadoes. In terms of rings, you really want to try to get lucky hit chance so you can proc Earthen Might more often. Critical strike chance is always good. Resource generation, that's another beneficial one that could work in your favor. Basically, if you do run out of spirit and you're spamming your basic attack, you're going to be able to regenerate more spirit per attack. So that's what resource generation would be. Moving down here to the weapons. You can see we're not running a two-handed, we're running a one-handed mace and a totem. So for this, your core skills deal up to 38% increased damage based on your amount of fortify. Whenever you activate Grizzly Rage, you will become fortified. And there's also the ability to gain a little bit more fortification under the ultimate skill tree as well, which we'll get to later in the video as well. And over here, this is personally my favorite offensive legendary aspect. Critical strikes with core skills. Everything that were tornado is a core skill, so we're always using it. And whenever you crit with it, that increases your attack speed. So again, more attack speed, more tornadoes. For the gems, pretty standard. You're going to want skulls in your jewelry here to increase that armor. A royal gem, the highest tier, is going to grant you plus 250 armor per skull. I went with maximum life, the ruby, in every single piece, granting 4% maximum life. And whenever you stack, I mean, if you're using 4%, I mean, as you can see, 4, 4, 4, and 4, it adds up. And down here, critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. We are always making enemies vulnerable, and I will also explain that more as we go through the build. Next, we have our spirit boons. Under the stag, we have wariness, 10% reduced damage from elites. Under the raven or bird, I'm not sure if it's a raven or not, crow maybe, you get 30% critical strike damage. Under the wolf, we run calamity. You extend the duration of your ultimate skills by 25%. Your build definitely revolves not only around throwing tornadoes, but being able to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate, and also having it extended is great, because you want Grizzly Rage up as often as you possibly can. And down here we activate 2. First being masochistic. Critical strikes with shape-shifting skills have up to a 75% chance to heal you for 3% maximum life. It's definitely good for survivability when you're dealing with higher level content, like Nightmare Dungeons. And lastly, we have Calm Before the Storm. Nature magic skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. So, as you can see, the synergy start to build. You know, you being able to reduce the cooldown of the ultimate is crucial. Alright, next we'll go over to the skill tree. For this build, you're going to put 1 into Storm Strike. Pretty much so you can just get over here. So whenever you're going to be building up Spirit with this, it has a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable. So that's the first way that we can make enemies vulnerable, is with Storm Strike. Here's the meat and potatoes of the build. Tornado, you're going to want to put as many points as you can and get additional points from gear into Tornado. Moving over, you have to take Enhanced. And then Raging Tornado. Enemies hit with Tornado have a 10% chance to become vulnerable for 3 seconds. So this is another way that we apply vulnerable. Another thing that you could look into, you know, it's first off, understand, you know, this is just to be used as a template, this build. You guys are more than welcome to, you know, make it your own and, you know, try out new ideas. But this is just, I'm just doing this to help you guys out. But one other thing you could do is you could apply crowd control, so you can slow them with your tornadoes. And there's a lot of ways once you get to the Paragon board to increase the damage to crowd control enemies. So that's another route that you could take. Moving on to these smaller ones, you're going to increase your maximum spirit. So the more spirit that you can hold, the more tornadoes that you'll be able to dish out. Wild Impulses, I do highly recommend this one. Your core skills, they do cost more spirit, but you're going to deal up to 15% increased damage. So I do recommend that. Moving down here, critical strike chance against close enemies is increased by 6%. You'll be surprised that close enemies, it's actually a pretty wide radius. So I definitely recommend picking up Predatory Instinct. And Digitigrade Gate, this is going to increase your movement speed while you're in werewolf form. You are always going to be in werewolf form on this build. So this is going to help you get out of a sticky situation if you need to, move quickly. And plus it helps with the fluidity of the game. You know, you feel a lot more comfortable whenever you can move around. No one likes to feel sluggish. Moving on, we put 1 into Cyclone Armor. And over here we're going to have damage reduction. The good thing about Cyclone Armor is that on activation it's going to cause a CC, which is knocking back. So if you have crowd control damage, you know, from your glyphs, you'll be able to actually get more damage onto them after knocking them back. Down here we got Blood Howl. Blood Howl, moving on here. The good thing about Blood Howl is that you can spam it quite frequently, because every kill that you get with it it's going to reduce the cooldown by 1 second, so essentially you can spam it. And spamming it's a really good thing when you consider that Bloodhowl also increases your attack speed. So again, attack speed, more tornadoes being able to dish out, so you'll find yourself being able to hurl tornadoes extremely fast. Moving over here, we got a couple points. 1 into Ancestral Fortitude, increasing your non-physical resistance. And then Vigilance, 5% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. And again, use this as a template. I do recommend, you could put a couple more in here for a little bit more survivability if that's what you wanted to do. Something to think about. We're going to completely bypass the companion tree. And moving into Hurricane here. Once we get Hurricane, once you activate Hurricane and enemies start pushing you, once they're affected by it, they're going to deal 20% less damage. So that's very beneficial, especially for higher level content. Over here, this is how we get vulnerable again. Storm skills have up to a 10% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. So you see we have a lot of ways to make enemies vulnerable, even before we get to the Paragon board. Moving down here, you're only going to want to put 1 into Neurotoxin just so you can get to these 2 down here. One crucial one for this build is Toxic Claws. Critical strikes with werewolf skills deal 8% of their base damage as poison damage. So you're going to be critting quite often, so you'll be able to apply poison most of the time. And then when you do, you and your companions, we don't have any companions, but you will gain 30% bonus critical strike damage against poison enemies. It's a big damage buff. Moving down here, we have our ultimate, Grizzly Rage. Notice at the top, it says Ultimate Shapeshifting and Werebear. This is actually a mistake, and I will show that here in a second. There's an issue with the game where sometimes it doesn't always proc your abilities, but it's cool that I actually get to show you guys this. Periodically, you should go to your skill tree and take a look at this, because it is going to go to its default settings sometimes. And I recommend you unequipping and re-equipping your gear so that will change. So I'm really glad that happened, so I can show you guys this little, I don't know if you want to call it a bug, but your base storm skills are now also, excuse me, it's going to be this one right here, Grizzly Rage, shapeshifts you into a dire wolf. So we're going to unequip that, and we will re-equip it, and that should fix the problem. Go down here, there it is, your ultimate shapeshifting werewolf. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. Sometimes it won't proc, so you may want to unequip and re-equip your things. This is a little fun fact for you guys. Moving on up, we have 3 into Defiance. Nature Magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites. 3 into Natural Disaster. We can skip the first part. As you guys can probably already assume, we're not using Earth skills, but your Storm skills deal 12% increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. As you know, our Cyclone armor does knock back enemies, and with this current build we also immobilize enemies, and I will get to that later on in the build when we get to the Paragon board. Up here, I believe my amulet has +3 ranks of resonance on it, so normally it would be Nature Magic skills deal 6% increased damage, and we could ignore all the tripling the bonus for Earth skills, but because I have 3 extra from gear, we get 12%. Over here, Defensive Posture increases the amount of Fortify you gain from all sources by 15%, and a 15% chance when struck to fortify you for 4% base life. It's really good for that, again, that higher level content, a little bit more survivability. And lastly, like we said in the beginning of the video, Earthen Might, damaging enemies with Earth skills or Storm skills because of the legendary aspect that we have on the gloves. You have a 5% chance to restore all of your spirit and cause your attacks to be guaranteed critical strikes for 5 seconds. And that will do it for the skill tree. So now we're going to switch over here, switch gears to the Paragon board. Give you an overview real quick. So starting at the first one here, our first glyph is Earth and Sky. Nature Magic skills deal 10% increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. As you know, we make enemies vulnerable and we CC them as well with knocking back and the immobilize. And I pick up the prime node here for increased damage, and Impel also for increased damage. Over here we have Fang and Claw. While in werewolf or werebear form, close enemies will take 12% increased damage. Make sure that you guys hit these requirements as well. So notice on the willpower it's plus 40, so 40 out of 40, and you'll get that just by hitting the necessary nodes within the red shapes here. Same with down here, 40 out of 40 on willpower. So make sure you'll branch out and get at least the minimum. It is important to note that in a lot of cases, let me find one real quick. So in a lot of cases with these, notice that underneath where it says werewolf, for every 5 willpower purchased within range, you deal X amount of increased damage while in that form. So in a lot of these, the minimum, you at least want to hit the minimum so you can get the additional bonus. But keep in mind, the more that you do get, the more you will be able to benefit from it. But also, keep in mind that you're going to need every single available point if you want to make sure that you get not only 5 legendary nodes, but 5 glyphs. So just keep in mind that you may have a few extra nodes that you spent into those glyphs to get the most out of one of them. You may need to, take 1 or 2 of those off if you're cutting it close. Continuing on. Spiritual Power, 28% core skill damage and 35% basic skill damage. Little maximum spirit here. Remember, more spirit and plus spirit on kill. So remember, more spirit, more tornadoes you can throw. Next we have Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. You're always spending spirit while you're throwing your tornadoes. So this procs quite often. And you'll be able to actually notice, it'll actually count for you over on the left hand side of your screen, right above all your abilities. You'll have those perks that proc up, then they allow you, they indicate to you how much spirit that you've spent. So you'll actually be able to visually see that in game. Moving over, we pick up Thunderstruck. Storm skills deal 30% increased critical strike damage against vulnerable or immobilized enemies. We do both. Going down here, 30% critical strike damage and 10% vulnerable damage for Tempest. Deluge, 30% critical strike damage and 15% damage to crowd controlled enemies. And our glyph, we're back here again for Werewolf. You gain 10% damage reduction while you're on werewolf form. And the really cool thing about this glyph is not only does it give you that damage reduction while you're in the form, and we are always in the form, but again, we have for every 5 willpower purchased within range, we deal increased damage while in the form. It's an extremely good glyph. And over here we have Stormcaller, 20% storm skill damage. Moving over to the 4th board, Lust for Carnage. Critical strikes with werewolf skills will restore 2 spirit. So that's good to have that more spirit. Ferocity, 20% werewolf skill damage, 15% critical strike damage. Feral, 20% werewolf skill damage, plus 10 up on willpower. This next glyph is Spirit. Critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you by 2% for 20 seconds, up to 12%. And then as long as you hit the requirements on the dexterity for this one, your critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you. Oh, well, excuse me, I already read that at the top. But yeah, so you'll see it there. Moving over to the last one. Constricting Tendrils. This is where we are going to be able to immobilize those poisoned enemies. So nature magic skills have up to a 15% chance to entangle the enemy with vines, immobilizing them for 2 seconds, and poisoning them for 120% of the base damage dealt over 4 seconds. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention that there is another board that you can use. It's another option, so it's definitely something to play around with. You know, something that more or less fits your play style. So if you didn't want to use constricting tendrils, we'll go up here, and I will show you the other one that you can probably get away with on this build, and that's heightened malice. While there are 3 or more poison enemies nearby, we're always poisoning enemies once we crit. You deal 45% increased damage just right out the gate to those enemies. So it's another one that you can take a look at. And we have Nature's Will, 20% nature magic skill damage. Same over here for Devastation. And that 16% damage to elites. And the 30% damage to crowd controlled enemies. Again, you know, that's slow, immobilized, knocking back, etc. And that will do it for the Paragon board. So we covered the boards, covered the skill tree, the boons, and the gear. I really hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. And again, if you wanted to see raw gameplay of it, world boss, nightmare dungeons, etc., I recommend checking out my most recent live stream. And I hope you guys have an amazing day. Thank you.